I'll start to record. Okay,
I just started. Okay.
good.
Welcome everybody to Salesforce user group, December 2021. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues to start it, and we have limited attendees for now, but hopefully they will catch up with us. We will use this time to give Cassia from Copado opportunity to tell us more. We'll record this, share with all members in Ottawa user group, and hopefully we come back for another discussion with Cassia in another month when we have opportunity to learn more about Copado. Okay, let's give Cassia now presentation rights and see what you have in books.
Can you unshare your screen so that I can thank you? And since there is such a small group, let's keep this conversational. So if you have any questions or if there's something you want to dive into, we can pivot and talk through this. I think I have, until noon, so 35 minutes. Is that correct?
Are you sharing your screen? Because I don't see it.
Yeah, I am. Can you not see it?
Okay, it's probably on my end then. Just a second.
Can anybody see my screen? You can?
I probably
yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Okay, just keep going then. Oh, there,
okay,
I can see it.
So while he's
I can see it.
All right, so customers are going to buy Salesforce when they're looking to drive digital transformation faster than with any other product on the market. And as your technical team members are building out valuable features, they need to be able to track key metrics in order to determine the impact that their work has once it's live in production. And believe it or not, some Salesforce customers have over 500 admins, devs, and release managers all working in their instances on a daily basis. By using Copado as their end-to-end DevOps platform, all of the teams, regardless of size, they can track these metrics and determine that the impact that Copado makes on their DevOps process and then in turn, their business. And so by focusing on the business impact of the work being completed, continuous delivery is going to be enabled as Salesforce teams are continuously fine-tuning their DevOps process with the end goal in mind, which is going to be to deliver those high-quality features to the business as quickly as possible so that the company can undergo that digital transformation. So sort of pivoting to Copado, Copado is an end-to-end DevOps platform that allows you to create structured, scalable deployment flows, which give teams control and governance over their release process. And from within Copado, you have the ability to customize and visualize the flow of environments that changes are going to be deployed through your dev boxes up to production. And so these scalable pipelines, such as this one here, enable release managers to have visibility into the changes being built, as well as a simple mechanism to actually deploy those changes from environment to environment. So this is the interface that release managers would use to actually deploy changes up the pipeline. And because Copado is fully innate to Salesforce, as you can see here, the pipelines are set up using a point and click interface from within your Salesforce environment without any code knowledge needed. And then additionally, and I'm not sure everyone's familiarity with version control, but additionally, each Salesforce environment is going to have its own corresponding branch in a Git-based repository, which will enable seamless and automatic version control. So Copado does integrate with all Git providers. That includes your GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and Azure. And we commonly see teams struggling to adopt version control not because they don't have a Git repo, but it's because their team members don't have Git experience, or they forget to complete the manual version control related tasks as a part of their deployments. And so Copado automates all Git related operations behind the scenes while team members remain within the Salesforce interface, which means that any Copado team can implement and get the benefits of version control without any additional manual effort or having to learn platforms outside of Salesforce. So looking at each environment in the pipeline, we can see numbers and above corresponding arrows forwards and backwards. And these numbers represent unique user stories, which act as containers for changes to metadata components as they're deployed up the pipeline. And these numbers are forming your release managers of the quantity of user stories that are ready to be deployed at any given point in time and from which environment, which is giving them visibility and control over the release of new developments. So this is going to be a user story record, which is just like any other record within your Salesforce org. At the user story level, we can see our deployment path up to production, which has been defined by the pipeline that we were just looking at. And the object has been named user story to align with the naming convention used in other ALM platforms such as Jira or Rally, which are used by many of our customers to track and prioritize their changes that need to be completed. And Copado does enable companies to continue using those tools, those planning tools of their choice, by supporting integrations and bi-directional syncs with Jira Rally, so they can replicate their information in Copado without any manual duplicate effort. And so by doing this, Copado is going to centralize all of the information that's going to inform your admins and devs of what it is they actually need to build. But beyond the convenience of having all of your requirements, your project details listed out here, Copado's primary function is to use this user story as the actual metadata container for you to bucket your changes in as a vessel to deploy them up the pipeline. So let's say that I'm an admin and I've been assigned to this story. I've looked over the requirements, my agile statement, and I'm ready to get to work. My first step would be to define which environment I'm actually going to make my changes in before logging into that org and completing my changes. And just as Salesforce empowers admins and developers to make click-not-code changes to metadata components, Copado is going to extend that experience and ease of use to the deployment process. So once my changes are complete, let's say that I logged into Dev1 and drummed up a couple of custom fields, I'm going to need to link them to this user story via this commit changes button here. And this is going to open up a metadata grid, which is an interface that will allow us to select the components that have been updated via this metadata grid right here. And this contains every piece of metadata from the environment where I made my updates, that one that I specified on the user story. And so from this metadata grid, I can easily locate and select the updated components via, we have an auto select changes button. So all of the updates that have been today, since yesterday, or since the last time I committed changes to this story. Or I can use the search, sort, and filter capabilities that are included with each column in this grid. So let's say that I want to find my custom field, select the metadata type, and then choose a couple of custom fields. Once I've done that, the components that I have selected are going to be listed here on the selected metadata tab for final review before clicking commit changes and getting these components actually linked to my user story. And this is one of the points. Are there any questions so far? It's been quiet. I'm going to take a pause.
Yeah, we have some questions. Just go wrap up your story, and we will jump in questions.
Sorry, was that I couldn't hear you. Was that a no questions?
No questions at this moment. Just,
okay.
When you get to the complete story, kind of, we will ask some questions.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we can wait till the end. But again, if you do have anything that jumps into your mind, please speak up. So once I do click this commit changes button, this will be one of the first points where Copado is going to leverage Git to automate version control operations in the back end without your team ever needing to leave Salesforce. In addition to getting these changes committed into your repository, Copado will also create a commit record as a child record to this user story, which is going to give traceability into every change that has been made. So on this commits tab, we see records of every commit that's been made against this user story, as well as a running list of each unique metadata component that have been committed across all of these commits. Okay. So
just before you continue, this selection of components, metadata, and things like that, it kind of looks like improvement to standard change sets selections, because you can filter by any column. You can easily get to what you're looking for without too much scrolling.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of think of it as Copado's, elevated change set, if you will. With change sets, you have to go in component type by component type. It's kind of a tedious process. If you select a component on this page, then you click next page, it deletes your selection. There's a lot of sort of nuanced issues. But here, you can select every component type. You can select a few. You can search by the name. And it's sort of a continued list without any incremental adds to your change set, if you will, that will all be, displayed here and then committed. If you did do multiple commits, that's totally fine too. So, if you did a daily commit and you were working on this user story for a couple of days, you could continue to add new components, but it is just a lot easier to use this interface to select components than, in my opinion, the change set.
Yeah, sounds good. And this GitHub, use of GitHub and things like that, from admin standpoint, this is set up by Copado administrators on the beginning, and they don't need to worry about this anymore. Or...
Yep, that's exactly it. It's something that you set up on the front end, and then unless you're actually going in to get to maybe log a pull request or something like that, your admins never have to interact with it. So you can, we have links here and here on the story to view the branches in Git if you wanted to, but there's no reason why you would have to.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool.
Thank you.
Good questions. So moving right along, with Copado, you can automate quality testing and enforce quality gates to ensure that all of your changes are passing the relevant quality checks before moving up through the different environments in your pipeline. And so by introducing less failures into production, your team will be empowered to focus on innovating instead of reworking bugs that have been released. And we call these quality gates because, again, they can actually gate or prevent user stories from being deployed unless the story complies with whatever quality level that you've instituted. And when testing and governance is enforced at every step of the release process and bugs are caught earlier and in lower environments, they're going to be exponentially less costly to resolve than when they aren't found until they're live in production. And so these tests, you can see there's a number of different tests we have here that are just out of the box. They can be triggered to run automatically alongside deployments or via these actions here at the top of the user story from our ad hoc one-off tests. But regardless of how they're initiated, once these tests have been executed, the results will be logged conveniently as child records to your user story. And this is going to enable effective reporting down the line, as well as promote traceability and accountability of the actions that have taken place on this user story. And then the user story is also one of the places where pre and post deployment steps can be logged and tracked. So these tasks here, they encompass, I'm sure all of you are familiar with pre and post deployment steps as admins, but these tasks encompass all of the actions that need to be taken before or after metadata deployments in order for a story to be marked as fully complete. And so when you create these steps on the user story level, they're going to be replicated each time the story is deployed up the pipeline so that you never have to recreate these step records with each deployment to each new environment. And as you can see from this type column, we have a handful of task types available, some manual and then some automated. And they've been sorted into an order, sort order here, as well as categorized and indicated whether they need to be completed before or after the deployment. And so by logging these steps in Copado, again, as child records to your user story, you can get out of spreadsheets and start to use Salesforce as the single source of truth for all deployment activities. I know when I was a Salesforce implementation consultant, we tracked all of our deployment steps in spreadsheets, which weren't always in sync across the team and definitely ran into a couple of issues there with duplicate efforts and missing a step. So really convenient to have these logged against your user story.
Yeah, but in a nutshell, you need to have deployment policies or pipeline manager or somebody who set up those things in first place, or this is coming as part of predefined best practices from Copado, how it works.
These the tasks themselves?
Yeah, correct, yeah.
So they're going to be specific to the requirements of the user story. I don't know if you generally see quite this many tasks on one user story, but let's say that you had to deactivate a validation rule before deploying a new field because you didn't want it to trigger and cause an error in the deployment. That could be logged here as a deployment step. Or if you wanted to, activate an exterior testing tool, you could automatically call it with the URL callout. So you would define these on the user story as they come in, just depending on the content of that story. And then once they are completed here, they're going to be replicated onto the deployment records each time that story is deployed. So you're not creating it again to integration, not creating it again on UAT.
Is
So,
it possible?
Yep, sorry.
Sorry. Is it possible to deactivate workflow rules, process builder flows using the Copado, and then activate them again when you finish the plan?
Tyler, do you know if you can use a custom setting or Apex to do that? Are you on still?
Yeah, we can do this using the metadata or custom settings if you plan about this up front. But if you didn't plan to do this, then you didn't build it this way. This is why I'm asking, because every of those features has active, inactive.
So yeah,
I'm just wondering, is Copado capable to reuse this active flag to?
So yeah, I'm not.
Like that?
You can, again, I think you'd have to preset that up. Like you'd have to write an Apex script or define a custom setting to do that in the front end. You can't just tell Copado, hey, find this one flow and deactivate it. But that's also something you could log as a manual task if you hadn't put in that front end work, and not automated, but still you have a good record of what needs to be done at every point in the process.
That sounds good. Now that we have a little more attendees around, I am asking them to start asking questions, because it is going to be recorded and we will share with others.
Sounds good. Are there any other questions about deployment tasks? All right. So after running all of our tests on our Quality Gates tab and we've logged our deployment tasks, this user story is ready to be promoted to the next environment. And in order to do this, I would simply click the submit button here, which will check that all of the quality gates have been passed before marking it as ready to promote and available to promote from the pipeline. And so here we are back on our pipeline. Again, let's look at our Dev1 sandbox. We can see that there are 6 unique user stories that are available to be deployed up to integration. And to initiate a promotion, I simply need to click on the 6 above the forwards arrow, which is going to bring us to a screen presenting us with a full list of stories that are ready to promote from that specific Dev1 sandbox. And from here, we can cherry pick which stories to deploy and which to hold back. So let's say I only want to deploy the stories that are associated with this specific release. I could select these 2 and click promote and deploy up here in the corner. And that said, just because these stories have been grouped together for this particular deployment doesn't mean that they have to be tied for each subsequent deployment up the pipeline. I do have the ability to decouple and regroup stories each and every time they're deployed. And this is one of the key differentiators between Copado and other solutions. Because Copado allows users to be selective about what changes are being deployed at any given time, the release process becomes truly agile and flexible. And so again, after selecting these stories, I'd simply click promote and deploy. And this is another point in the process where Copado will leverage Git in the backend to automate version control in your repository while simultaneously deploying your changes to the destination environment within Salesforce. Any questions?
Yeah, let's see, I have questions about what's happening if we need to revert to previous version or things like that. Are it something that you're going to talk about later, or?
So like rollbacks?
Rollback, yeah.
So we do have an official rollback feature in the product pipeline, but for now how we're handling rollbacks is going to be in this hotfix environment. This is specific for rollbacks to production more than anything. But essentially, let's say that something somehow passes all of your quality gates at each deployment and makes it up to production to cause issues in your live environment. Your hotfix environment is going to always be one step behind production. And so once those groups of changes are deployed to production, you have the ability to take those same components that are causing the issues and back deploy them into production so that the issues are reversed.
And while we are talking about those sandboxes at this moment, is it UAT and hotfix full sandbox type, or?
They can be either. So these, I guess traditionally your UAT is going to be a full sandbox because you want all of that data in there, but it can be either. I think in this particular pipeline, these are all just dev sandboxes.
Okay, thank you.
You can, again, you can completely configure this entirely to how your system is working. You could have more levels of the hierarchy. You could have more environments at each level. They could branch off into different directions. It's really however your process is working.
And just for sake of organization, every developer that's working in Dev Sandbox needs to have a licensed user account in production in order for this to work. Is this correct?
So they need a license in whichever org Copado is installed in. Copado needs to be installed either in production or in a production level org. So if you wanted to have a Copado governance org sort of sitting here, you could do that if there was any security issues with having your users working in production. But yes, everyone who is using Copado does need to have at least a user license or a Copado user license in whichever org it's installed in.
And is this license a standard license, or we can use cheaper versions like platform license or application?
Do you mean the associated Salesforce license?
Correct, yeah.
You can use, oh man, I'm forgetting the specific license, but there is sort of like a lower level Salesforce license that can be assigned to people while still giving them access to Copado. I can circle back with that specific license. I forgot which one it is.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's platform license or application license that is cheaper. We got one question in chat, if you don't mind to see it. Can we integrate check marks with Copado?
Is that a testing tool?
Hassan, can you tell us
it's
more?
a testing tools. Yeah.
So Copado supports a number of out-of-the-box integrations, which I do not have memorized. But even if checkmarks isn't included in that list of integrations, you can integrate with pretty much any external tool just by using URL callouts. So that was one of those deployment steps that we were looking at earlier. I'm not sure if you were on the call, but this is one of the places where you could, here this one is regression testing. You could trigger testing from other tools via one of these steps using a URL callout. So pretty much any tool is on the table, whether or not it's officially supported by the out-of-the-box integrations. All right, really quickly. So I do want to go over back promotions while we're on this screen. So we've just deployed our user story up to integration. And now I want to make sure that my sandbox is also up to date with the latest and greatest from across all of these other dev boxes. And Copado is going to allow users to easily keep their environments in sync using back deployments. So just as we initiated that forwards deployment by clicking on the 6, I would click on the 4 above the backwards arrow to initiate a back deployment. And this will bring us to a screen pretty much identical to the one that we were presented with before, only difference being the stories available to back deploy and then the direction of the deployment arrow here. And just like before, I could select which stories I want to back deploy into my sandbox, click back promote and deploy, and voila, my sandbox would be up to date with the latest and greatest. And having this tool to back deploy incremental changes at any given time pretty much eliminates the need to refresh your sandboxes. So no more having to schedule refresh windows or complete tedious manual tasks. And yeah, just really ensures that when you are completing your work in your sandbox, there's less of a chance of running into a conflict down the line because you are truly working with the most recent updates.
Question on this part. If we have something that is configuration data driven like CPQ or something else that's used custom object for it instead of custom metadata or settings or things like that, is Copado capable to have this as part of deployment task list, or this is something that's manual?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Copado has a data deployer tool, which can be used for CPQ and related data. You kind of build out these data templates, which is a relational web of data that can be then deployed either in tandem with your metadata component. So, you could deploy a data template alongside your actual components, or you could create a deployment without any metadata components that just houses your data template. And using that data template, you can either, and this doesn't maybe apply to CPQ, but you could seed sandboxes with production data. So if I wanted to test out a new feature using real production data, I could migrate some of that data back here, or more for the use case of CPQ, that could be deployed regularly up the pipeline.
Thank you. I think this is great selling point because it's always pain to keep those things up to sync and be able to work in lower environments. But no refreshing sandboxes is also great.
Yeah, that's a big selling point.
Every refresh of sandbox causing that you need to set up so much things to get it in working again.
I know it's such an intricate process. I feel like people don't really get like what really goes into sandbox refreshes.
Yeah,
been there,
especially with integrations that if you have sandbox integrated with other apps and things like that.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, with Copado, you still probably would want to do a refresh. I don't know if we have a best practice, probably like once or twice a year. But I think like with Salesforce, the best practice is maybe monthly. And that's just it's not really doable for most organizations because work is going on at different speeds in different environments. And it's hard to find a time that works for everybody. So definitely makes that a lot easier. And sort of building off of that, I do want to call out all of the automation points that can be configured using Copado. So every feature that we went over today can be completely automated, including your quality gates, your testing, conflict resolution, deployments, and also your back deployments. So if I wanted to say all back deployments to these dev boxes are going to be automated for, before start of business hours on a daily cadence, I could do that. And so you wouldn't even have to go in and think to click that 4 to back deploy those 4 user stories. You would just open your Salesforce at the start of the day and just know right off the bat that you're up to date.
Yeah, this is great. We have 10 minutes more for you.
I have one more thing, if I have 10 minutes.
I just want to give opportunity for questions to come up.
Okay.
We will delay a little next presenter, but just to be on time.
Let me have one and a half more minutes, and then we can do questions. Is that good?
Sounds good. Yeah, no.
Okay, so this pipeline is giving us a bird's eye view of our DevOps process, but to actually identify the bottlenecks or inefficiencies of the process, we need a way to review the data that our system has been collecting. And so because Copado is built on Salesforce, all of the actions that occur are logged as data points and custom objects and fields that can be leveraged in Salesforce reports and dashboards. So, we looked at commit records, metadata records, and then all of those test result records along with deployment task records. And Copado does provide a number of out-of-the-box reports and dashboards. Here's just one of them. It's looking at a holistic view of the Copado architecture spanning across environment and project. And I think I just wanted to point out, for example, this is a really useful report chart right here. It's showing the number of deployments per environment and which are completed with errors, which is a really good way to sort of check where maybe you need to institute more quality gates and tests before moving forward. Because if you have one environment where half of the deployments are completed with errors, you'd want to make sure that you find a way to prevent that in the future. But the value in these dashboards is, in part, the exhaustive data surrounding your DevOps process that Copado will track, but also in the fact that Copado is native to Salesforce, which means that your Salesforce team can own their own metrics by just leveraging the Salesforce reporting tools that they're already familiar with. So there's no need to learn any new fancy reporting tool. Copado is collecting all of that data for you in Salesforce. And so using that, you can really leverage that data to find important metrics and continue to improve your process. And that was it. So now questions. I'm ready for it.
Yeah, it seems people are shy today, but I have a question for you. There is a click deploy IO website that is stating that it is Copado company.
Mhm.
Can you compare what we're getting there to try and what is, because this process that you show us seems a little complex and a lot of change management. In my understanding, click deploy is a little simpler, but
Yes.
entry point for Copado full implementation.
Totally, yeah. So
How you will differentiate these two?
so just I'm not a click deploy expert by any means, but it's a much less complex system. It offers pretty much none of the features that we looked at today. It's housed by an additional website that you can have a free license to, so you can use it for free. And it is a good starting point if you do eventually want to graduate into Copado for enterprise. It's also just a good alternative to change sets. So, it's easier to select your components that you want to deploy and link environments very simply in one interface, but you're not going to have version control. Tyler, are you there? I think my teammate may have dropped. I don't believe you have version control. You're not going to be able to institute any of these testing or your deployment tasks. It's really just a commit and deploy tool that's going to be a better and simpler interface than change sets, but it is free, at least for the first couple licenses.
You got my attention now. When you say free. So let me ask a question. So I use not change sets. I use unmanaged package to deploy stuff. Can I use this free solution instead of doing it the old-fashioned way?
To deploy unmanaged package or
yeah.
I believe so. I mean, all of the component types that are on the metadata API are available across Copado Enterprise and Essentials, which is the new name for Quick Deploy. So I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to, unless there's it doesn't do data deployments, I don't believe. But if the managed package is just metadata components, you should be able to use it.
Yeah, it's just metadata components. But what I've struggled with is I continue to build on the template that I've been working on. I have to go and find all the different reports and so on. You name it, all the different metadata type thing. Is there a way of finding that easier than manually looking through all the screens?
So at least, were you here during the commit part?
Yeah, but to be honest with you, I was struggling with some other things at the same time, so I wasn't really paying too much attention.
Got it. Okay, so this is Copado Enterprise, not Quick Deploy, but this is our metadata grid where you can select your metadata, and
Yes.
It's going to include every metadata component in your org that you did your changes in. The default.
So can I ask a question? So
yes.
If I have a particular dashboard that I created,
yes.
So I want to be able to pick the dashboard plus all the reports without having to go figure that all out. Can I use this tool to do that?
Easy, yeah. So best practice here is going to be to have a daily commit cadence, or whenever you're done with changes, you'll just add them to the story, because you can have multiple commits on one story and you want to have that log of the changes you've been making, even if you're not completely done with the story. And so the default sort for these components are going to be by last modified date, which means your most recently modified components, your dashboards, reports, et cetera, will show up right at the top. And so unless you're looking for a component that was modified a while back, it's really easy just to find those most recently modified components and select them, and then they're here. We also have the auto select changes drop-down option. So you could automatically select all of the components that have been updated today, since yesterday, or since the last time you committed to the story.
So let me give you a little better example. So for example, let's say I created a dashboard, a new dashboard, or some new graphs on a dashboard, and I decide to create a new dashboard, but I also had to create some custom fields in a standard object. So if that was my situation, just show me how you would do it. There's no Apex classes or anything like that. It's just either dashboard reports or custom fields.
So again, if you've just created these fields, dashboards, and reports, those components are going to show up at the top.
Oh, that's a good point. Good point.
So, we see a bunch of Apex pages and classes because they're the most recently updated in this particular org. But also, if you had just made those changes today, and that was the only store you were working on in Dev 1, you would just click done today, and then boom, they would automatically be selected. If you did need to go back, you could, filter, you could find dashboard. I guess we don't have any dashboards, but
yeah, okay, but I got the point. Okay, that's a good point. I never thought about the today. So if you do it on a daily basis, or you create your commits when you're satisfied, then they should be at the top.
Yeah, again, most recently modified components will show up right at the top.
Okay, I'm ready to buy it.
Yay!
Okay, this was great discussions. Any other questions from members? I think this is big. I'm sorry that we had trouble on the beginning and people probably give up to connect, but this was
we got 14.
Our survey was.
Keep going there.
I just want to say this. This was theme from our survey that people were asking to learn more about, and then we organize it. But there is another question in chat.
Let's see. Which are the must-have sandboxes and environments that we can start working with Copado? Must-have. There's no real requirement, I guess. Like, you could have Copado with one sandbox and one production org. This is totally customizable, and you can build it out to your specifications. I would say best practice is to have at least a hierarchy kind of like this. We recommend that each developer has their own sandbox. Maybe if you have a partner that you're also working with, they could potentially share a sandbox. And then you want an org where they integrate all those changes before moving forward to UAT for your end users to actually test. But that's not required. You could just have one sandbox in production and start using Copado.
Off the back of that, is there support for Scratch orgs as well?
Yes.
Great.
And Dev Hubs and all that jazz.
Excellent. And then the question I'd put in the chat was around custom pick list values in a standard pick list, standard field. Do they get caught up in the metadata, or do you have to remember to deploy those?
They do get caught up. And even if you have, this is sort of separate, but I did some testing on this because I was curious. Even if you have pick list dependencies, those will also be accounted for.
Nice, thank you.
Implements. It's pretty great. It's also really easy to deploy communities and the related components for communities, which is something that I used to struggle with a lot as an admin. So something to keep in mind.
There's another question in the chat.
Okay. Where can we find release notes? Copado release notes? We have them either on our just copado.com, or there's like a docs. Our documentation library is fantastic. Like, I go there every single day to learn more about the tool. So there might be release notes. Yes, here you go. I'm gonna just post this in here. Ta-da.
That's good, because now that we recorded the meeting, we get all the things from the chat, so we can post that, no problem.
Awesome. Is there anything else? I don't want to take too much time from the next presenter.
Cassia, I'm dealing with multiple Salesforce orgs within help systems. Is there any kind of way of managing kind of common features that we deploy across the different orgs?
Yeah, so you're talking about multiple production streams?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Totally. So that's when we have a lot of customers who do that. We have them install Copado, not in their actual production org, but in that Copado governance org right here that kind of attaches to both production orgs as well as each of the sandboxes. And if there was a feature that you wanted to deploy, like, reuse an Apex class that you didn't want to have to rebuild, you could just connect a sandbox from one pipeline to the next and then facilitate that deployment that way, and then move that Apex class up the pipeline in your other production stream. still making sure that it undergoes the appropriate testing and whatnot.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very common use case, actually.
Do you have any kind of use case material on that? Or should I reach out to you separately to kind of have a separate discussion about that?
We may, but why don't you reach out to me so I can look into it?
Okay, perfect. Will do. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay, if there is no more questions, I would like to thank you, Casey, and to support and to be patient with us today. I hope we will get you another day next year or down the road to do a little more about this. I finished Copado training and I know what it can do, but
nice.
For our members, it's kind of unknown territory, and we need to start peeling onion to get this out. And just one question before you go. Salesforce is giving us hint that DevOps is going to be, with GitHub, it's going to be standard feature of Salesforce down the road in few releases. What do you think about it?
Oh, with their Salesforce DevOps tool?
Correct.
I think that's great, and that it's a good tool for what it does. But Copado, we are backed by Salesforce, so like we have a partnership with them. It's not really a competition or an either or. Copado just offers more features than the Salesforce DevOps tool does. So it's great if they're going to add version control, but they're not going to have all those testing capabilities and that pipeline view. And so it just really depends like what your need is and how complex your deployment process is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would like to check on Greg. Is Greg around?
Yeah, this is Dave from Grax, and Greg from Grax is also on as well. Yep, we're here.
Okay, sounds good. Then I will stop recording here.